Okay, so I'm still stuffy. It's the same day, and I've just been blitzing out all day long on ideas and concepts and debates and commentaries and stuff. Anyway, so I was on Instagram and I came across this picture, I guess, of a particular post that had to do with the movie Avatar, and uh, and I guess somebody was, I guess there was a question posed. I can't even remember now. It was so long. Like I've been on this for like a half hour, maybe longer. Anyway, it's just reading the comments. But the initial question had to do with whether or not people recognized what the story was, and most people, even myself, I think, I saw it as Pocahontas. But largely, the broader story is the invasion of indigenous people by by some sort of foreign group, right? So that's basically a story of colonization, or the tensions that arise out of colonization. Anyway, so I was reading through all the comment sections regarding this picture and this question as to what is the story, Avatar, what it's based on, and people, it was a really ridiculous, like most of it is ridiculous, but there's an interesting comment made by one of the commentators, a DJ Codeine, who says, and I quote, human history revolves around combat. Some people, like Marxists, believe the driving force of history is struggle between social classes. In actuality, the driving force behind history is the struggle between nations. War pushes history. It's a part of life, and peace is merely a temporary interval between wars. So, yes, the lands were taken, but they were not stolen. They were fought for, and the Europeans won. Okay. And I had to pause when I read that because I thought, that's a really interesting point of view. Um, and uh, so I guess that's where I find myself right now, sort of debating the veracity of the point. I think the perspective is a valid perspective to have on the function of war. I think it's a bit dark to think of war as this thing that pushes us on, but I think that it probably does represent a large um, portion of the principles or the philosophy of uh, I don't know, maybe the ruling class, maybe the powers that be that have sort of presided over the evolution of society, that might be a type of perspective that I'd never really considered before, actually, like the function of war. What is the function of war? I've always just sort of thought of war as um, uh, a, I mean, I've never really thought about it. I've just really thought of war as a bad thing. I've never gotten to in depth or in detail about what is the function of war. It's just, to me, death is bad. That war is bad. But I've never really thought about it as as a a device that somehow pushes us forward. So I feel like that was a really insightful commentary. Not that I necessarily agree, but the perspective is an interesting one. It really serves to validate a function that, for all intents and purposes, I think of as just uh, you know insanity. Like I think of it as a last resort. Not to say that you can't ever go to war, that you shouldn't ever go to war, but I've always thought of it as one of those things that should only be considered in the when you're pushed to it. But if you think of it in terms of a or maybe not a military device, but a progressive device of some kind, that might explain why there are so many wars happening all the time. Like, you know, that we've had generations, and there's always been a war in every decade. And to me, I just always thought it was just, it never made sense. Why would anybody opt for such a thing? But if your genuine principle, if your genuine philosophy, if you genuinely see it as serving some kind of greater good, I mean, maybe, maybe. So Um, but the question I have to ask though, this last part of the sentence here. So yes, the lands were taken, but they were not stolen. They were fought for, and the Europeans won. So here's where I take issue with that a little bit. Okay, maybe not a little bit. Maybe I take issue with that statement a lot. To me, um, uh, what I think of, like when I think of, I guess something like colonization, um, as I've seen it, like just looking back at history, thinking about the role of colonization and how it played out, whether it was Africa or India or any part of the developed world, and it didn't seem to be something whose function was eradication of the indigenous peoples of the area. So to me, North America is a very distinctly different operation. It's a very distinctly different manifestation of quote unquote war. Because A, I'm not sure war was ever declared. Was that declared? Did the Indian did the Indians and the Europeans declaratively go to war? Or were they just uh, sort of systemically routed out and largely eradicated by a variety of means. So maybe not like on a in terms of like being slaughtered, but a series of um, circumstances that ultimately led to the crippling of people. Like I mean I don't think they're not gone. They're they're still here, and hopefully you know like I don't know. I think the narrative is a complicated one, regardless. But still, I think that I do draw a distinction between what we would term war and what I would term genocide. Um, because when I think of colonialism, I don't usually think of genocide. I think of yes, extraction of resources, exploitation of the of the yeah. I do think of that. Um, but I feel like North America is a different. That was a different proposal. That was a different proposition. That proposition it was a different set of circumstances. Um, so having the English say, for instance, as an example, if you have you look at the English moving into a region like India, as an example, um, in as much as they had an impact on the region and this that and the other thing, they didn't. There wasn't an eradication of the people who were indigenous to that land. That's not what happened, right? In North America, it seems to me that first of all, in terms of historically, I don't think of the Indians, the Native Indians, and the Europeans as ever going to war. That was never sort of an explicit, an explicit event. Um, I think that this was, uh, I don't even know what to call it, to be honest with you. Like, I think this is a very unique circumstance to all of humanity. This North America to me feels very different. Um, and I think Australia might be similar in this way, but the numbers in North America, I think, because you have to realize, and I don't think most people realize this. Like for me, I remember having this eye-opening experience watching a documentary years ago on the CBC that maybe it wasn't even a documentary. I think it might have been like a little mini series or maybe like a series of vignettes or something on American history or Canadian history actually. And but what it detailed, and one of the most important illustrations was looking at the map of North America and how it identified all of the different um, tribes that existed before, and then um, comparing that to a more contemporary map and the remaining tribes, and it's clear it was genocide. Like not I'm not it was just it was shocking to me. And I don't think that we really uh, I don't think we're really cognizant of that. So we can talk like we people like this statement saying that like war is just a natural function of human evolution and coexistence, and that it moves us forward, and that this was a basically a battle for the North Americas, between the Europeans and the Native Americans, and that they lost. Yeah, maybe, but I don't feel like that's how history talks about it. I don't feel like this was a question of um, like okay. So what I'm trying to say is, in a typical war scenario, like let's say it's the French versus the English, or some sort of land dispute or something like that. You know, there's some back and forth between the king and the queen, you know, and the king and the queen, or not certain of the king and the queen, but like between the two ruling factions, and they have debates and they negotiate, and and when it becomes intractable, you know, eventually they're like, that's it, we're going to war, and then they go to war and they have a battle or two battles, or they battle until the resources one side is defeated, and then whatever. I mean, it, and I don't know, and then it just seems different to me. Like it just seems like a different thing than what happened here. What happened here is a very unique circumstance. So I'm not sure that I'm totally on side, though I do appreciate the the way one might weave the narrative of war into the history of man as a necessary function. Maybe, maybe, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's what we're talking about here. Uh, in terms of what the makeup or the founding of the Americas. Yeah, no, I'm not entirely sure that I see it quite like that. Um, and maybe that's why people feel like the Americas were stolen, because it wasn't declarative. It wasn't a declared war. It wasn't a dispute between a king and a king. It wasn't like that. It was like a land of uh, a civilization of people who lived very differently, who were then sort of summarily invaded and then gradually crippled. Uh, in terms of their system, like whatever system they had, whatever that looked like, was just eroded. And so I don't I have a hard time thinking about it in terms of wars. I feel like this was not about uh, it wasn't like that. I feel like it was much more subversive than that. So I think it's you can a little bit the war analogy makes it seem as though this was a very um, you know like there was lots of integrity, and people had like everything was very above board, and everybody knew where they stood, and no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think that's how it went down. I feel like um yeah, no, I feel like that is not how it went down at all. And so I'm not really sure that the idea of using war as the sort of the noble um I don't know what you want to call it, equalizer, qualifier. um mm, I can maybe see it if it's if it really manifested in the way that when you think about how wars actually manifest themselves. Maybe, yeah, but I don't think that's what happened in North America. I don't think that's what happened with the Native Americans that lived here, um, at all. I think this is a very, unique and distinct situation, separate and apart from all of the other heinous atrocities that happen in human history, separate and apart from how we normally behave terribly. I think this was a unique display of terrible behavior. Um, and I'm not really sure that it's easily. Mm, uh, I don't think that it can be simply summed up as, here are two nations that went to war and one side won and one side lost. I think that that's uh, uh, I think that that fails to see uh, the nature of the thing that went down here. Uh, that said, though, I mean, yeah, I've never really thought of war as having a function uh, from a historical perspective. I've always just sort of seen it as a heinous, horrible thing. Uh, but maybe there are. I mean, I don't want to say good things that come out of war, but maybe it does have a part to play. Maybe there's it's fair enough to say that wars have a part to play, and that's undeniable. And that okay, that might be true. That might be true. I might concede that, but I still don't think that that explains what happened here in North America to the Native Americans. I don't think so. I think that was a different thing.